Everyone pretty knows about Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And during this season, I really want to be talking about motivation. You know, how do we really get motivated? How do we enable ourselves to get to the next step? Now, Abraham Maslow was an individual who wrote some theory of motivation back in 1946 and later established more information around this in later years. But I guess most people don't necessarily understand what the additional stuff he added to the original Maslow hierarchy of needs. Now, with this in mind, it's important to realize that Maslow had two main sort of like functions or two main areas when it came to the hierarchy of needs. There were deficiency needs and there were growth needs. And so with deficiency needs, with these specific types of needs, they were things that if you weren't able to do, then what would end up happening is that you would have a deeper desire to try and get those things because it required, let's say, for example, your survival or whatever it may mean. So an example of this is if you don't eat, you'll die. Okay, if you don't have money, then when it comes to resources and other things, it's going to be very, very difficult for you to supplement or do the things that you need to do. When it came to growth needs, these were things based on your own internal desires and motivations. So rather than stemming from a lack of something, which is something related to deficiency needs, it stems from a deep desire in order for you to achieve a specific thing, okay? And so this is where we start getting into the realm of doing bigger, bolder, and better things. Now, if we look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, you can see there are initially 5 levels. So you got physiological needs, you got safety needs, you got love and belonging needs, you got esteem needs, and you've got self-actualization needs. And so if we're looking at the physiological needs, these are basic things such as sleep, eating, nutrition, sex, etc., etc. Then if you look at the safety needs, you're looking at things such as health, money, career, etc., etc. So these are foundational things that are required in order for you to really exist in society, so to speak. Then after that, you got love and belonging needs, where you're looking at friends, relationship, family, that connection that you'll get from other people. You've also got esteem needs related to ego, respect, status, all these things that make you feel a certain way in terms of like feeling confident, I guess, or assured or in oneself. And then you've got self-actualization needs, which really stem from you getting closer to your highest form of potential. Now, this is what all of this is about. Now, interestingly enough, there have been records of Maslow talking about 3 other forms or types of needs. And these include conscious needs. So this is like the stimulation for learning, understanding, delving deeper into things in order to be accustomed or expert in a specific field, as an example. Beauty and aesthetic needs, okay? Really respecting the beauty and awe in creation, arts, and everything else. And above the sort of level of self-actualization, you've got transcendence. So transcendence is going above and beyond what is of the human spirit, so to speak. So this feels a bit more mystical by nature, but there is a certain flow and energy associated with this as you work and do the work that you're called to do. It's above and beyond you as an individual. And so when thinking about the aesthetic and the conscious needs, these stem just after the esteem needs and just before the self-actualization needs. Now, I said conscious needs, but really I meant cognitive. So these are things that help you in terms of your learning and stuff. And so rather than 5 levels to this, there are 8 according to, you know, the later writings of Abraham Maslow. Now, some people may say, okay, do you have to do these things in order? Not necessarily, but what you'll realize, and this is what Abraham Maslow said, is that there is not a requirement, but the pattern works where it is better to fulfill those needs in order as best as possible before moving to the next level. And that's what naturally or organically starts to happen. Now, he doesn't say there's a prerequisite, even though some people are misquoted saying that, but they do allow you to move on to the next level. And let's say, for example, if you were trying to achieve something, but then you weren't able to eat day to day, whatever it may be, you may be distracted from what you're doing because you haven't met that deficiency need. because there is a lack of something. Now, some people may argue that some people take some risks when it comes to this stuff, and that's true and it works out for them. But based on what Abraham Maslow was studying, at least when he was looking at these individuals and how he got derived this information, he realized that actually it's best to do it in a certain hierarchy, and this is where this hierarchy comes into play. So as I've stated before, the order of the needs is not necessarily important per se, although it says it in the hierarchy. However, it's important to understand that human beings are multi-dimensional by nature. They're multifaceted, and so they're going to have an array of collection of different forms of motivation that enables them to want to do something. And so what I'm saying by this is that, you can't just be motivated by one thing. There are so many things pulling us in so many different directions. But this says something about the potency. This says something about the weight of that need or that motivation when it comes to wanting to achieve a specific things. Thereby, really outlined by deficiency and growth needs as well. Hopefully this makes sense to you. And of course, you can always check out, the internet, books, diagrams in terms of understanding this stuff in a deeper level on how you think it may relate to you. You may not agree at all, okay? There has been some dispute with this. Now, the dispute comes from the fact that, number one, Abraham Maslow surveyed some of the highest and finest minds back in the day. So I think he interviewed people like Eleanor Roosevelt, Albert Einstein. I'm saying Rockefeller, but I don't know if that's necessarily true. I know the first two are, at least anyway. And so there appears to be a polarization towards those who have been doing great in society or may have had the wealth or whatever it may be. And some people say that, well, what about those who have psychological clinical disturbance or certain mental health conditions that need to be included in this form of research? But Abraham Maslow felt like there was too much focus on that stuff already, okay? And he wanted to draw into a different sort of realm, and this is where the whole idea of humanistic psychology became more birthed, okay? So this is more around the human element, slightly more sort of like less feeling of a clinical nature that can sometimes feel quite doom and gloom and very robotic and logical, and something a bit more sort of dynamic by nature. And so just bear this in mind when thinking about Maslow's hierarchy of needs. The second thing I'd say is that some people felt like some of those needs aren't necessarily in the right place. So for example, sex being at the base foundation of these needs. Now what comes to mind is some horny ass individual just thrusting their hips, wanting to, gyrate to some random person in the street because it's a need. Okay, number one, that would end up being an illegal activity. And number two, that's just not how it works. And so maybe there's some clarity that, is required of Abraham Maslow in terms of the sex need. However, some people feel like it isn't a foundational thing because it doesn't take into account the emotional connection that is required from some individuals, at least anyway, or many should I say, when it comes to the sex side of things. In addition to that, of course, Abraham Maslow did a lot of his work within the West and a lot of people who were focused in the West. And so this doesn't necessarily, relate to, potentially at least anyway, to individuals who are more communist by nature, who have a different collective or different mindset when it comes to, the human spirit, the individual mindset, what the aim is when it comes to transcendence or self-actualization. Is self-actualization a thing, or is it community actualization? And so there's a difference. And so understanding this has caused some dispute. Now, whether you're for the hierarchy of needs or not, it's undisputed that this has been a very, very influential psychological concept that has helped many people within the professional and personal setting as well. Now, if you think about using Maslow's hierarchy of needs for yourself, you can use this as a measure to see how satisfied you are in different areas. You can also use this for business endeavors. I mean, this in some way shows you why certain markets are more successful than other markets. So if you think about the health sector, which is the majority of the foundational need, then you realize that actually that makes sense. 60% of all things searched on the internet is actually health related. And so if you think about that from a business standpoint, then you can see why things work the way they work. If you're thinking about the industry that I'm in, then that's more focused on potentially the esteem needs level, or potentially the self-actualization or transcendent level. Okay, some may argue the cognitive level as well, but all of these things are under dispute. But the point being made is it's a bit more higher thinking, more ethereal by nature, and so that requires a certain caliber of individual who's interested. It's not going to get the masses because it doesn't necessarily get those internal, sort of like needs for those individuals. And so hopefully this has given you an idea in terms of the theory of motivation, at least from Abraham Maslow's standpoint. Now, if you're somebody who's interested in not just being motivated, but being productive and a high-performing individual, then click the link in the description below to check out my webinar in terms of how you can become a high-performing individual. Again, especially during this day and age where performance is something that we're taking more note of, we're getting more distracted as individuals, especially in this day and age. And so it requires not only sort of like tech and tools and everything else, but the right sort of mindset, the right sort of value system in order for you to be on track. If you like videos like this, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell. And as always, my friends, understand, reach, and expand. Peace.